war for gold, a war for money, and a war for souls. A war on terror, a war on drugs, a war on kindness, a war on hugs, a war on birds, and a war on bees. They got a war on hippies.
Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. Hi everyone, welcome to Revolution Books. It's really good to see a good crowd. Obviously, we have someone that drew out the crowd. So if you have not been to this space before, welcome to our new space for Revolution Books. We're always needing help and volunteers, so if anyone wants to be a volunteer, you can see either myself, CJ behind the desk, or Sharon. Just to take care of a few orders of housekeeping, you do need a key for the restrooms. It's behind the desk, so if you need a key, you just walk out the door and head left. It's at the end of the hallway, the restrooms. Please put your cell phone either off or silent or vibrate, one of the above. We are going to be filming this talk for my show Voices of Resistance on Olelo. So I'm going to ask that you refrain any questions until after the talk. We're going to make a point not to film the audience just out of respect for people's privacy. Some people don't want to be filmed. You never know what watch list you might be on if you frequent Revolution Books. Hang out with us subversives over here. And also I want to let everyone know that World Can't Wait is going to be having a contingent in the Martin Luther King Parade happening this Monday. So if anyone wants to join our contingent, we will have a truck for people who aren't able to walk. I'm not yet sure if it's a flatbed or a regular big truck, but we will have a vehicle for sure. And we're going to be taking out the message of no to endless war, no war on Syria, no war for global empire, and no more war on the world.
And Veterans for Peace is meeting tomorrow night at the Quaker House at 6:30.
And Anne would like me to let everyone know that Veterans for Peace is going to be meeting tomorrow at the Quaker House, the AFSC in Manoa, at what time? 6:30. Okay. And also, there is a little sign-up sheet going around for Dr. Hatim's book, Chief Complaint. So I'm sorry that we do not currently have it in, but if you do want to sign up for it, there is a list going around. You can sign up for it. CJ has that behind the desk. So I am very honored and happy that Dr. Hatim Kanaaneh is here tonight. The first time I saw him speak was many, many years ago at Church of the Crossroads. I'm not sure how long ago that was. And, you know, I've seen lots of different political speakers, and not that they're not all amazing, but truthfully, his talk has stayed with me for a very, very long time. And I'm going to start getting very emotional like I always do. But his talk was so moving and so eloquent. And, you know, when he was speaking about his childhood during the Nakba, it had such a very strong and powerful impact on me. And I'll never forget when he was at Church of the Crossroads and he was talking about the dividing line for humanity. And that for the issue of Palestinian liberation, you know, this is a dividing line for humanity. Now, of course, I feel that way about many issues, from police murder and terror to war on the world, and I could go on and on. But I was so moved and so struck to have someone else say that and say, you know, this is that important an issue. This is where you stand for humanity, and where do you stand? Do you stand for the liberation of Palestinians, or do you stand for their oppression? And it was such an amazing talk, so I was so happy and pleased when I heard he was going to be speaking again. When he first spoke at Church of the Crossroads, it was about his book, Doctor in Galilee. And now he's going to be speaking about his newest book, Chief Complaint. And, you know, what it's like for a Palestinian doctor living in Israel. And we can only begin to imagine the stories, both heartwarming and heart-wrenching at the same time. So I am very, very pleased to introduce Dr. Hatim Kanaaneh. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate what Revolution Books is doing on behalf of all the revolutionaries in the world, and on behalf of the Palestinian people, the solidarity that the people in Hawaii, all of you, show to my people is overwhelming for me. And I am very proud of it because I, at least deep in my heart, I feel I am part of the Hawaiian community. I did go to the UH, and that's where I met my wife, and we, although we have lived in Palestine all these years, we both, and our children as well, feel very much part of Hawaii. So thank you for being here today and for joining me in trying to think a little bit about the meaning of writing this book that I did, a collection of short stories based on my actual work in my home village in Galilee. Okay, let me, I did make some notes, so I'll open my computer and see if I can keep to the plan that I made. Yesterday, and actually the day before as well, I had an opportunity to speak about the political issues and the current situation back home in Israel, Palestine. Today, my plan is to speak mainly about the literary side of things and less about the politics. But it is nearly impossible to separate the two in my case. So pardon the political parts that keep springing up as I am going to be speaking about my book of short stories. The book of short stories is called Chief Complaint. And let me start by telling you where that name came from. Okay, in 2003, I retired officially from my work as a physician and as a public health professional. And since then, I started dabbling in writing. I have a blog. I put pieces on it every once in a while. And a friend of mine in New York who teaches creative writing at NYU one day mentions to me that he appreciates my writing and that it reminds him of the writing of Primo Levi. And I said, who's Primo Levi? I never read anything by Primo Levi. And he said, oh, you have to read his book, The Periodic Table. The Periodic Table is, of course, a book that's written by the famous Jewish Nazi Holocaust survivor. And I didn't, as I say, I'm not that, at the time at any rate, and even now, I'm not that very well informed on literary matters. I am a physician, and I spent my life reading about medicine and public health. And only in retirement I shifted to writing. And the question that, well, before we get to that, the idea that Primo Levi used in organizing his book, The Periodic Table, is using a chemist's tool to tell the story of his people and their suffering. And so I decided, if he can use the periodic table, why can't I use a tool of the physicians that is standard for every physician? When a doctor opens a file of a patient and starts recording the visit, At the time, we used paper and pencil. Today, you do it on computer. But you start at the top of the chart, it says chief complaint. That is what brings the patient to the doctor. Why is he in the office that day? The chief complaint. And there is also another sort of similar tool that the doctors use, and that's called review of systems, or system review. System review. And system review is you start with the patient asking about his medical history, how do you feel generally, and then the head, and then you go down the eyes, the mouth, the neck, chest, abdomen, legs. So you go down with that. And so I decided that's what I'm going to use. And I started by taking events or actual events that happened to my neighbors and my family and my people that I treated. And I used a medical hook to tell their life stories. And that's how I went in organizing this book. And to just go back actually to the start of what I said, there's a question that really it begs to be answered. Why would a physician drop his medical practice and change professions to writing? So for that, to explain that, I have to go back and tell you a bit about how I became a doctor in the first place. I grew up on in a Palestinian rural community, small village, where people lived from farming. Really, there was no cash to deal with. People exchanged produce. My family had mainly olive oil as their main produce, and we'll change for wheat from the neighbors, and for lentils and fava beans from the other neighbor, and so on. And so it is that kind of rural community that I grew up in. And when I went to elementary school, I apparently did well, and so my parents and everybody in the neighborhood would say, "Oh, you are really smart, you're going to be a doctor." And lo and behold, I believed them, and I went on and became a doctor. It's a long story. I came first to a congregational church college in Yankton, South Dakota. I met my dearest late friend, Dijon Lim, who is a cardiologist, who was a cardiologist till this year when he passed away in the Big Island and in Hilo. He was my roommate, and I really loved the guy. And he got too cold in South Dakota. So he said, "Let's go to Hawaii." And so we came to Hawaii. And I swear to you, we applied and we didn't wait for an answer. Why wouldn't Hawaii accept us? I mean, you know. We came, and sure enough, the University of Hawaii admitted us, and everything went fine. And I met my wife, and eventually she put me through medical school, finished at Harvard, and came back here and did my internship at Queens. And then the big question: do we go back or do we stay here? I'll tell you this. I had really very attractive offers financially and in terms of the titles and so on, I was offered a position on a team of researchers at Harvard School of Public Health that was doing work on supplementation of wheat in Morocco. And I was offered a 5-year contract for that, and I refused. And then Queens Medical Center offered me to run. At the time, there was no specialty that's called emergency medicine. So I was offered to run the emergency room at Queens Medical Center with a figure that I couldn't believe at the time. $110,000 a year was the offer. And this is 1960. That's a lot of money, damn it. And that I could turn my back on, no problem. But to leave Hawaii, my God, that was a difficult one. Really, really difficult. And so eventually, with my 2 degrees and with my pregnant wife and a Volkswagen camper that I ordered in Germany, my wife and I picked ourselves and went back. And she was pregnant at the time, so I was all set to change the world. I mean, I didn't need anything anymore, with Harvard degrees and we landed in this village that had no electricity, no roads, no telephone, what else? Fortunately, we had running water. When I left the village, we didn't have running water. By the time we went back, the village has organized a committee and they have running water into the homes. And I held that over my wife because anytime she complained, I told her, I told you there wouldn't be running water, and here you have running water. What are you complaining about? So it was, to make a long story short, I worked till 2003. On the way, first of all, I had a job with the Ministry of Health. I was in charge of preventive services. The British system that we inherited in Israel and Palestine and Middle East is called a medical officer. I was the medical officer for Western Galilee, both Jewish and Arab population of Western Galilee. And my office was in Acre, and I ran the show there. But it very clearly and very quickly became very obvious to me that, in fact, nobody in the system was interested in changing the situation, in changing the horrible conditions, public health conditions in my village and in the villages, the other Palestinian villages. So I went around and convinced 3 of the first Palestinian physicians to return to the Galilee, convinced them to join me, and we established a non-governmental organization that's called the Galilee Society for Health Research and Services, and it was specifically to improve the health conditions of the Palestinians in Israel, the Palestinian minority. So the moment I mentioned that the Palestinian minority, of course, I have to explain a little bit. What does that mean? 1948, when Israel was established, 85% of the Palestinian native population of the area that became Israel were driven out to become refugees in the surrounding countries, in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and so on. That was in 1948. 15%, that is me included, we woke up one day to find ourselves on the wrong side of the border and became Israeli citizens from day one that Israel was established. But Israel had a lots of discriminatory laws that led eventually to the fact that today the 15% of the 15% that were in 1948, we are now 20% of the total population of Israel currently. 20% of the total population of Israel. We own less than 3% of the land because Israel has over 36 different laws how privately owned land can revert to the state. A very simple example, and I'll stop politics and go to the literary side if I can. Just one example. A law from the Ottoman days states that a piece of land that lays fallow for 3 years or more reverts to the state. The Israeli Defense Forces would declare an area closed for military purposes, for targeted practice, and then 3 years later, the Minister of the Interior will declare that piece of land state land, and you couldn't, and that's legal. Okay, so at the end, this is again repeating. 20% of the population, we own less than 3% of the land. Regardless, you know, how where you stand, that's difficult to swallow for the person that is living there and suffering the consequences of all of those policies. So, as I said, I was convinced that the state, the various ministries, including the ministry in which I worked, and I was a mid-level bureaucrat in there, had no intention of improving the community, the conditions of this segment of the population. So I, as I said, with my friends, established a non-governmental organization that a charitable organization that reached abroad for funding and took initiatives to change those conditions, including mobile clinics for the Bedouins and so on. That rubbed the authorities the wrong way. Eventually, they told me, you either leave the Galilee Society or you leave the Ministry of Health. And they held some kind of a law that really justifies that. And they said, we're going to take you to court. You have to quit one of the two. And I quit the Ministry of Health and retired. That's in 1992 it was. At any rate, the Galilee Society, I'm proud to say that that's my major public health achievement, professional achievement. It's still running today, doing excellent work. It's less political nowadays than when I was running the show. But it is a fact that it's still running, and there is younger generation who are running the show, as I say, and doing great work. So I could stop right here, and that would be enough for me. But eventually, and this is something that very few people in America realize, the Palestinian minority in Israel had really no voice. The only media article or the only newspaper that would mention our issues at all was the Communist Party newspaper, Al-Ittihad, its name. But having said that, the Communist Party was very, very partial to the issues of the Palestinian minority in Israel. And it was frowned at by the system. And if you were, regardless what job you held, and especially if you were Palestinian, and it became clear that you are communist, you lost your job. Nobody would touch a communist in Israel at that time, although it is a illegal party. And so at the end, the Communist Party became almost identical to the Palestinian minority. Like probably 90% of the Communist Party members were Palestinian in Israel. Maybe that's exaggerated a little. But what happened is the Communist Party had an excellent idea. From where I stand, it was an excellent idea. They, to support their own membership, would pick the bright and committed young children of Communist Party members and send them on full scholarship to the Soviet Union, to one of the universities in the Soviet Union. And what was excellent about that is that they were not permitted to stay. They had to return to their villages, to their home, so that they can serve the party. There was an ulterior motive. They wanted to support their ideology and all of that. But for us, that's where we got all of our doctors, all of our engineers, all of our lawyers from the Communist Party scholarships. It was so successful that the United States Embassy in the 1980s, late 80s, imitated that and started giving 40 scholarships a year, and still today, 40 scholarships a year to our kids to come and study in the United States. Full scholarships. So, you couldn't argue with that one. Okay, by the time I got a bit tired of looking down kids' throats and their ears and trying to fix, pains and aches here and there, the village was full of doctors. I had to carry my bag and go knock on doors and ask, do you have a patient? I had to make a living. So I felt that I was no longer needed. I neglected to say that when I first returned, there was not a night, and I'm not exaggerating, there was not a night that my wife and I were not awakened by a patient or two or 10 or 15. Because I serviced about 50,000 people that had no other medical provider except me. And so my wife started practicing medicine a little bit on occasion. When I couldn't, I just couldn't stand anymore, she would say, okay, well, his fever is low, give him this, and bring him tomorrow morning. So, we managed. As I say, by 2003, the place was full of doctors. So I decided I will continue to promote the issues of my community. I felt very comfortable with having established the Galilee Society and having turned it over to younger generation. And I said to myself, there's another thing I can still do. I speak English. I'm going to try to tell those Americans about my village. I'm going to try to tell the world about my community, what life is like for us, and what issues we face with our state, and the big lie about the Palestinians, that they are violent animals. I would like to change that idea. I would like to show the real life of the Palestinian simple villagers that I know and that I love and that I am one from that community. So, first, I picked up lots of papers that I had written over the years and put aside and stored in a box, and from that I collected, or I chose enough to make a book of memoirs. And that was what I published in 2008, and I was here and presented that in 2009, a book that's called A Doctor in Galilee, which is a book of memoirs from about my struggle and my community's struggle. It got excellent reviews, but mainly by Palestinians and Palestinian supporters. It didn't reach the public I wanted to reach. So I started thinking about that, and I came to the conclusion that if we talk about Europeans and Americans, by and large, the average American reads fiction more than biographies. And I thought that's the way to go. So I went back to the university at City University of New York, CUNY, at the Graduate Center. They have something that's called the Writers Institute. I went and I was a fellow for 1 full year in the Writers Institute creative writing track. And I presumably learned how to write fiction. So I can write a book of fiction that will tell people about my community. And I mean, this is what I was saying, that I'll try to speak a little bit about the literary side of things. Like one of the things that I learned from my advisors and the people who ran the show is that a short story, for example, I was intent on writing these short stories. I had essentially written them already as portraits of characters in my village. But then I wanted to turn them into short stories. And we were taught and advised, for example, there are set rules for writing a short story if you want it published in the United States or in the literary magazines of the United States, and the Paris Review or the New Yorker or all the top ones. You have to follow a certain set of instructions, of standard rules. One of them that I just couldn't swallow is that you have to stick to a single storyline. Well, for God's sake, how does that deal with the Arabian Nights? You know, Arabian Nights is every second sentence you go on a tangent and you turn to another story, and then so I just didn't make sense to me, because that's not the way Palestinian writers that I know write. You know, Hatim Kanaaneh or Emil Habibi, they don't write just a single story. You know, they go off on. So when I finished training, I decided that what I learned there was the way I can tell where I am intentionally breaking the rules. That's all I got from that course, okay? And I went ahead and changed all the collection of portraits that I had from my village. I changed them into short stories. However, and the short stories are, as I said, arranged from top to bottom, okay? And the stories are based on real facts. There is nothing here almost nothing that didn't happen to patients in my clinic. And yet it is very fictional. Lots of it actually happened differently than it is stated here. I'm going to share with you one story, and I'll try that story to illustrate what I have been saying, and to give you what part of it is fiction and what part is fact. I'll tell you how are we doing on time?
Okay.
All right. Yeah? Okay. The the story is about two old men meeting in 2010, having parted in 1948. Okay? And it starts with two young men, and that's the factual story. Now the facts. Two young men, one from a neighboring village from where I live. It's called Deir Hanna. Deir Hanna literally means John's monastery. But it doesn't have a monastery. It has very few Christians, but I don't know where that name comes from. It obviously comes from the Crusaders' days. But there's Deir Hanna, that's over 90% Muslim. And a young man from Deir Hanna, named Fadi, I believe, I have it here, runs a Palestinian fast food place in Berlin, okay? Falafel and shawarma in Berlin. This is a fact. And I know the family of this young man. He, one day, sees a young man that comes in and says hello in Arabic, and they start asking each other, where are you from? The other young man, about the same age, is a Palestinian refugee whose family has left Beirut in 1982 and settled in Denmark. You remember, part of the settlement was to take lots of the PLO fighters out of Lebanon to Europe somewhere, and Denmark took in some of those refugees. So this is one of those. This is real fact. The young man is traveling in Germany, and he stops for a shawarma, falafel, and they start talking. And the guy says, because this refugee is from a destroyed village that no longer exists. The destroyed village is named Lubi. Lubi is fairly well known in Palestine because, at any rate, in 1948 it was demolished completely. Nothing of Lubi remains, and there is a forest on the place that used to be Lubi. And the forest is named after South Africa. It's the South African forest, because all of the funding for the maintenance and for the planting and so on came from the Jewish community in South Africa through the Jewish National Fund. This is a standard story. There is hardly a Palestinian destroyed village that you can see anymore. There's no empty spaces almost. It's all forested. And, you sort of hide the evidence. This is very true. So, Lubi is one of those villages, and I said it's completely covered with the South Africa forest. You are from Lubi, that's not far from my village, Deir Hanna, and the guy says, the refugee now, says, my grandmother used to tell me about Deir Hanna. She said she left something there. and for me to remember if I can one time go and pick it. What is it? And he said, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there is a set of brass coffee making set of 3 of them. And now the background, of course, that I know and every Palestinian knows, those brass pots are very, very valued, especially if they are, from your grandfather. I just happened to own a set that I inherited from my father. And black coffee making in the Arab world, and specifically in Palestine, it has a ritualistic essence to it. It's almost like the Japanese tea service or something like that. I mean, it's a very, very special thing, and not everybody knows how to make real black coffee that makes hair stand on your chest. I mean, that's something very special. And so the kid says, so he says, okay, let me check. By now, we are in 2010. We're talking 2010. He picks up his phone, he calls his father, and he says, there's somebody here that says we owe him these 3 coffee-making pots. And the father says, listen, I think there is something to that. I heard my mother talk of it. And he goes to his mother, and all of this, up to now, straight truth. This happened in 2010. And the guy asks his mother, and she is incapacitated by now. And I sort of exaggerate a little bit here. She got up one time and walked for the first time in 3 years or something like that. And she went and found them because they were very meaningful to her. Because that is amani. Anybody knows what amani is? Amani is keepsake. It is something holy. It's something sacred. You don't deal lightly with that. So, up to here is the real story. Now, the invented part. First of all, I had to put a medical hook, as I said, to it. So I had a friend of mine from Deir Hanna come to me in retirement. I'm retired in 2010, and asked me a favor. What's the favor? He says, I want you to come with me. There are 2 old men that are going to go to Luby. One of them is from Luby. They're going to go to the first where Luby was. And I'm afraid this man, he's very frail, very old. He may faint or something, and I want you to accompany me on this trip. So I haven't practiced medicine for 7 years now. I prepare myself and I take my emergency kit with me, and we go to the Luby first, the South Africa first, with these 2 men. This is all made up, okay? I will read you a little bit from this segment about the 2 men going to the forest. The old man, his complaint is that he cannot sleep. This is the old man. I didn't tell you how we got to the old man. The young man from Denmark, who claimed that his grandmother left those 3 pots in Deir Hanna, the young man decides to come and claim them. He arrives at the airport, and somehow he identifies himself as Palestinian, and apparently he spoke too loud or something, so they kicked him out. He wouldn't be allowed in. So he went back to Germany, to Denmark, and he sent his grandfather who is still alive. And the grandfather was the one that I was to tend to. And he came back, and lo and behold, I incorporated another story I heard here. Lo and behold, he is actually knows the head of that, or the old man of the family that keeps those three brass pots. Because the head of that family from Der Hanna used to work the land for him. He used to be his agricultural worker till 1948. And he was so anxious to go back and see him because he didn't pay him his payment for all the work in 1948. And he felt that that is the time to go back and pay him the money and claim the three pots that his wife, without telling him, had left there when she was driven out of Luby, okay? So you got the whole picture now. So now, the old man is talking, and we are at the forest. Since the day my grandson, may God extend his life, arranged for me to come on this trip, I hardly slept at all. Look at me. Sleeplessness sapped what little energy I had. And I have no appetite. I force myself to eat so I can survive until I do what I came for. The first meeting of the old mates in Der Hanna was emotional. The two octogenarians hugging and crying shamelessly in the presence of Latif's children and grandchildren. Latif is the old man who is from Der Hanna, who used to be the worker for the other man. Yunus is his name. So, yet more moving was the sight of them exploring the camouflaged ruins of Luby under the picnic facility in the middle of the South Africa forest that the Jewish National Fund had planted and tended with donations from the Jewish community of that country for some 6 decades. The two old men, dressed in traditional Palestinian attire, looked out of place in the midst of a modern children's playground as they recognized the sealed cave where they used to house their work animals. Starting with that, they reconstructed a virtual living Luby, exploring its houses, alleys, and public spaces from memory. Each complemented the other's mental panorama with his particular fetish details. A cactus hedge here, a stone wall was there, the grave of this holy man was here, the cemetery of this clan, the water cistern of a goat herd, the horse stable of a neighbor, the thrashing platform of a friend, etc., etc. Ignoring the pleas of their younger companions, the two cleared the heavy cover of pine needles with their bare hands to expose the foundation of Eunice's former home. Its outline clearly marked with cut black volcanic stone buried in the ground in an expansive rectangular space that now surrounded 36 pines and a famished single fig tree. An unruly cactus hedge abutted the southern perimeter of the destroyed compound. Crouching on his haunches by the fig, Yunus started to sing fraqiyat. Fraqiyat is separation songs. It's like the blues among the blacks. Started to sing fraqiyat, separation songs that decried his fate and recounted the glories of the old days. I prepared myself mentally to revive a fainting old man. If he were to faint, he probably wouldn't regain consciousness all that fast, what with his insomnia and scant food intake. But he wiped his eyes dry with the edge of his white headdress, and then reminded himself of how sweet the figs in his yard once were, and the almonds, and the pomegranates, and the carobs. Carobs needed no tending whatsoever, and gave marvelous fruit. Why did they replace the native carobs, the oaks, the terebinth, and the pistachios of his childhood wilderness with those fruitless pines? He wondered aloud. Someone suggested visiting the two modern Jewish communities that had been established on the outskirts of the raised and forested Lubi. There was a time when Yunus loved to visit his olive orchard in Sahel Dami. Sahel Dami is the name of the valley where Saladin and Richard the Lionheart fought the decisive battle against the Crusaders. That was in the land of Lubi. That's fact. So there was a time when Yunus loved to visit his olive orchard there. He remarked, sighing from the depths of his being. Both he and Latif once nurtured their families from the produce of that land. Now he had no desire to step in that altered space. Houses built on it were offered free to woo reluctant Russian immigrants to Galilee, he was told. Why wasn't he permitted to pitch a tent in Lubi to while away his few remaining years? He wondered to his companions at the mention of the travesty. So, enough of that. That's made up. But I have seen old men, I went with old men and saw them how they do the recollection of their destroyed homes and destroyed neighborhoods. I've seen that. So I was just picking from somewhere else and sticking it here to make up an interesting story. And so the two old men also start reminiscing about the battle that they fought together before Lubi was driven out to essentially Lebanon and Syria, and before the young woman who was carrying those coffee making pots got so tired she had to leave some of what she was carrying on the way, and she stopped at the first house in Deir Hanna and had something to drink and to eat, and they asked her to stay and she wouldn't, and she left, and so on. So that's the rest of the story. Now, just to end the story, they go back to Deir Hanna and they make coffee in those pots, and Deir Hanna has some of the people from Lubi who settled there in 1948, internally displaced. A few, but there are some there. So the story is that the old man made coffee the right way and invited all of his fellow refugees from Lubi to the celebration, and they had good coffee and so on. Now, later, Fadi, that's the boy from Denmark who was turned back. Fadi called. He spoke to his grandfather, and the two agreed. The coffee set must remain in Galilee. It was enough that they had been exiled from the homeland, he explained to his grandfather. The brass coffee set will stay and anchor his descendants as they ply the stormy seas of the diaspora. Yunus, that's the old man. I neglected to mention that Sahel Dami, where the battle of Saladin and Richard the Lionheart and all of that, the name Sahel Dami, Sahel means plain or valley. Dami means bloody. So it's the bloody plain since the days of Saladin, that name. That's factual. So Yunus slept better that night. When he woke up to the sound of the muezzin calling for the dawn prayer, the first thought that assaulted his somnolent mind was that of the coffee set. No one had the right to dislodge him and his descendants from Lubi. He resolved. He will surely die a stranger in a foreign land, but his spirit, his soul will return to dwell in one of those pots. It will issue forth as a fearsome giant every time that pot is rubbed in the process of making coffee. It will dash to Lubi. Sahel Dami was waiting. So there is a bit of threat of violence at the end. Okay? And with that, the story ends. And now I'll take questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Check it out, y'all. Check it out, y'all. To the beat, y'all. To the beat, y'all. Never sleep, y'all. Never sleep, y'all. Never stop, y'all. Never stop, y'all. Never quit, y'all. Never quit. Keep going and going. Keep going and going. Keep going and going. Keep going and going. They got a war for oil, a war for gold, a war for money, and a war for souls. A war on terror, a war on drugs, a war on kindness, a war on hugs, a war on birds and a war on bees. They got a war on hippies trying to save the trees. A war with jets and a war with missiles. A war with high-seated government officials. Wall Street war on high finance. A war on people who just love to dance. A war on music, a war on speech. A war on teachers and the things they teach. A war for the last 500 years. War's just messing up the atmosphere. A war on Muslims, a war on Jews, a war on Christians and Hindus. A whole lot of people saying kill them all. They got a war on Mumia, Abu Jamal. The war on pop is a war that's fair, a war that's filling up the nation's jails. World War I, II, III, and IV. Chemical weapons, biological war. Bush War I and Bush War II. They got a war for me, they got a war for you. We can't stop it when the beat just